I want to introduce Kay Clark, who is going to present the Old Hall, Chestermere Community Center from 1920s to the 1980s. Go for it, Kay.
Okay, next.
Okay.
This is the land acknowledgement. I'll let you read it. Next. I'm going to be talking about the old Chestermere Hall and how it came to be, and hope that each one of you will have something to share with memories of all of us. Many of you have been to the Chestermere Rec Center for events such as hockey, craft sales, and voting. But did you know that the area has been a center of residents of Chestermere area to socialize long before the current rec center was built? We need to go back to 1910 to see what was going on in the area. In Calgary, many things were booming with all kinds of new communities. 14 business blocks, 12 warehouses, 8 hotels, 5 schools, 2 hospitals, Mount Royal College, a library, and speculation was rampant. Next. This is the advertisement for a new community next to Calgary, Victoria Square. We have the pleasure of announcing that we now have perfected our plans for its development. Next. Looking west, you can see Calgary in the background. You can also see a number of rail lines that never materialized were planned. The Victoria Square is front and center just to the right. Next. This is where Victoria Square was located. It's now the location of East Hills Shopping Center and Stony Trail. Next. In 1912, it had 35 homes, a hotel, all kinds of factories, Buckeye Factory, File Factory, Jam Factory, and the Pioneer Tractor Factory. And keep that one in mind because it figures prominently into our story. It had utilities. There was a gas-driven power plant for homes and street lightings. It had a water system, water delivered to homes and businesses by horse and tank. Mail was delivered to the Weno post office. But by 1918, the area was in decline. Next. This is the old advertising diagram from Glenbow Archives that indicates where things are. Well, sort of. It's definitely not to scale. The Pioneer Tractor Factory, which did not actually ever make a tractor, is located in what appears to be halfway between the Bow River and Chestermere Lake. After the factory closed, it was partially torn down, leaving only the floor of one of the buildings. Next. In 1920, a local Chestermere farmer, Mel Brown, purchased the floor of the Pioneer Factory and it became an open-air dance pavilion. He moved it, I'm not sure how, probably by horse and team, from the area where it was to Chestermere, to just on the west side of Chestermere. John A. McDonald, who is a blind musician, provided music for open-air dances. Next. You can see the open-air dance floor in the photograph to the right of the screen. And the advertisement said from the Calgary Herald, "You who desire a nicer place with proper atmosphere." That's, although the bottles in front of the group on the front makes me wonder about that one. Next. Next. In 1921, the United Farmers of Alberta are part of the history as well. If they had not advocated for land recreation, the building would not have had a place to exist. In a meeting, they purchased 22 acres of land for a picnic ground for the UFA. This acreage was next to the lake owned by the CPR. Mr. McDonald lived at Cheadle, which is a small village east of Chestermere Lake. Next. As I mentioned, the land was owned by the CPR before the 1940s. The group paid $556 to be paid in 10 installments from 1921 to 1931. Next. The group decided on a name. They became the Chestermere Country Club. Next. In an article written by Mrs. Mary Barker in Saddles, Sleighs and Satirons, the community history published in 1972, it was a busy time with many community volunteer workers. The main part of the hall is reported to have been finished by 1922. That is, the walls were up and the roof was on, with open verandas around the sides. The slide gives you the name of some of the early community members who were involved. And some of the names might be familiar. Wes McElroy, there are still McElroys in the community. Ernie Irving, Willis Spare, the barn that's falling down just to the west of Chestermere was the Spare Barn. Will Barker, Carmen Ellis, whose name is on the big white barn just to the north of Chestermere, and Fred Wood. Next. This photo was taken shortly after the construction. The view is across the lake from what is roughly the place where the landing is now. Next. This is a wider view of the same photograph, showing you where Chestermere Boulevard is right now. If you look at the road off in the distance, just on the right side of the where the arrow is right now, that is where Chestermere Boulevard is now. So the Safeways would be just up to the right of that. Next. The hall was advertised as a lovely place with all kinds of amenities, and in the 1920s was actively utilized for dances 2 or 3 times a week in the summer. There was no heat in the building, so in winter, attendance would have been very uncomfortable. It had a boat and a lagoon, and they had a floating wharf and excursions around the lake. Next. In order to keep operating, the hall board sold shares. This certificate was purchased by a Chestermere farm wife, Bessie Jane Woods, in 1931. Mrs. Woods bought 100 shares for $1, and that kept the thing afloat for a while. Next. One of the things that Chestermere Historical Foundation gets from time to time is some really interesting things. And they were donated a book of dance tickets from Penley's dance floor in 1934. Somebody didn't use their dance tickets, obviously. Dancing was advertised in the Chestermere Pavilion every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday by Penley's Syncopators. Sounds very interesting. Next. As part of this presentation, I hope that many of you will be willing to share memories of things that you experienced at the old hall. This photo reminded me of a personal memory. The water tree and trees at the edge of the lake were a place where families who were at the hall would go. My father was at a meeting one day, and my mother took we children to play in the water. I was about 5 or 6. The water was very shallow and I was playing on my knees. And I still have a scar on that knee where the broken glass was. I hope it's been all cleaned up since then. Next. One of the ways that we kept information is this book. This is a minute book from 1939 to 1966. It gives real insight into what was happening. Some of the secretaries had wonderful writing, and some were not. They were very hard to read. Each meeting ended with a lunch provided with whatever hostess could be prevailed upon. The old hall had no heat and was cold in winter, so activities were not held. At the end of the 1930s, less people were attending events. Most of the trees, the boat, and the lagoon were gone. In early 1939, Mr. John A. McDonald offered to donate $1 toward retiring the hall debt for each dollar the community collected for the Red Cross. The community collected $3,823.71, and the hall was paid for. Next. In early 1939, they met in March the 6th, the organization. At the time of the organization, they had to decide on a name, but in April, they had to change the name because the first one was not approved by the provincial government. Next. Young people from the community were often celebrated in this hall, as were Agnes Mackenzie and Pete Lester. Shortly after their marriage in 1938, the Chestermere community got together for a celebration. They were given a gift of money and this poem, which the family still has. And that happened in the hall. Next. In 1939, this is what the hall would have looked like. The verandas on the sides had been closed in. Next. Lots of things were happening. In February 5th, 1940, they voted to purchase lumber to build a hockey rink. And the hockey club to be responsible for the same to be stored in the basement, seconded by R.G. Lester. They moved in June to arrange for sports day. In August, they moved that they charge $5 for the use of the hall for a municipal election. But they discovered that the municipal council had written off their back taxes, so they decided that charging them for anything for using it was not a good idea. So they reneged that one. Next. The annual general meeting was held January 15th, 1941, and it was moved by Jack Bates that we have a dance in the hall. Moved by Westfallis that the charge at the door be 35 cents. And so lunch was to be provided by Mrs. Ellis and Mrs. Wood, music by Pete Lester, my father. I didn't think that was a very smart move on their part because my father was the least musical person that I have known. The doorman was Henry Wood, and the booth was to be operated by M.D. Carlisle. Next. One of the things that the community had very early was a ball team. There was a league of 5, Chestermere, Indus, Shepherd, Delmead, and Langdon. And this is the Chestermere group. Back row, left to right, the one on the end is not known, Albert Bishop, Bill Laycock, Bill Lester, Bill Spearstra, Joe Laycock, Stu Laycock, Harold Clayton. Front row, Jack Bates, Craig Johnson, Matt Bates, Avery Clayton, Ken Clayton, and Dave Welsh. The second photo shows the scorebook and the club colors. And you may know that some of the guys in the ball team are wearing hats that have two colors. We now know what colors those were because a small beanie was made for me in 1943 by my mother as the team mascot. In 1943 as well, they decided to up their dance charges from 40 cents to 50 cents. Next. This is one of the early hockey players on the rink. This photo is of a longtime Chestermere resident, Ken Clayton. Next. Later on, this is a later picture of one of the hockey rinks and just one of the versions. Some of the skating actually happened on the lake. Next. 1941 to 1945 were the war years, and they were felt throughout the community because many of the young men of the area were overseas. So many of the activities that were done were relating to support the war effort. They had dances, they had sports days, and in June of 1942, they reported on the minutes that the minutes could not be read at one of the meetings because someone had stolen the batteries from the lighting plant that they used to light the building. The police phoned and were arrived shortly. A report on the success of the Red Cross drive, which complete returns were $11.78. Next. There was a men's club formed as part of the community effort. The idea was that the men of the community, farmers in particular, miss much that their city brothers take for granted. Men whose work is solitary, such as farmers, miss engaging in group activities. So on June 7th, 1944, it was moved by George Ray that they rent the basement and for a men's club for a period of 15 years at a rent of $1 a year. And if the club was disorganized, all final assets to become the property of the hall, and the hall be given first chance to purchase any movable equipment. That photograph shows one of the curling club teams as part of the hall men's club. Next. More information from the minute book. They had a discussion on the rental charges for the hall. In 1946, they were going to rent to the outsiders $15, to a community, anyone in the community, $5 in the summer, $7 in the winter, and $2 extra for opening the hall to be present. In regard to painting the hall, and by that time it did need painting, they had quotes from Paint and Art Supplies. A vote was taken. It was decided to paint the hall themselves and buy the paint from a place called Paint and Arts. It was decided to paint the hall ivory with a black roof. I remember it with a green wall and black roof. And they had a second piano, and it was determined that it would cost $80 to fix, and they decided not to sell it. So they gave it to Mr. Ed Albertson so that he could have it for 5 years with an option to buy. Next. This is an air view of where the old hall was. In the upper left-hand part of that screen, you can see what is now Chestermere Boulevard. On the right side of the screen is the lake, and you can see that there's ice in it. So this air photo was probably taken either in fall or probably early spring. You can see the circular patterns there where the ball diamond was. And in very faint area, you can see where there was a racetrack. And it went around there, and they actually had horse races at one time. Next. In 1951, a treasurer's report showed the bank balance of $754.29, with bills owing of $55. They were able to get a piano from the Janet School, and they were able to sell it to buy chairs for the hall. They wanted to get Calgary Power to put power in, but it cost just about as much money as they had, so they didn't do that. Next. They had an offer to buy the hall, so they called a meeting to talk about it. An offer was made by Mr. Alan Dick to buy the hall and small acreage surrounding it. The general opinion of the board was that the property should not be divided, but held together as one unit. And the offer was $12,000. And the board thought that it estimate anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000. It was the opinion of those present that they could not consider selling it until they had enough money to replace our present facilities. They had to buy insurance. They had to fence the grounds. There were lots of things that had to be done, and those are recorded in that minute book. Next. In 1963, the community was wondering if it would be better to sell the property, so they advertised. On a poster was, "Attention, Chestermere. Whatever happened to the good old days? The hall board would like to know if you want to retain the hall or not. Come on February 25th at 8 p.m. Adult entertainment, admission free, and coffee." 100 people came and voted to keep their hall. One person was heard to say that if we sell our community hall, we'll sell the soul of the community. Next. These pages indicate the signatures of those present, and they were in the minute book. I thought it was very interesting in reading those pages. I knew many of those people. My mother's name is in the list. My father's isn't. And it took me a while to figure out why. My mother and father were looking after two of my children because I was in the hospital with a brand new baby on that day. So probably my father was the one looking after the babies. Next. They had water problems right from the beginning. And from the beginning, they probably hauled water in because the water wasn't very good. And they discussed in 1966 of drilling another water well and talked to the provincial plumbing inspector because well, storage tanks, possible sewage systems, they would need some information. They would need to drill at least a test well. And lack of money was a big problem. And so there were various fundraising ventures discussed. And they decided that they would have a barbecue, hopefully to raise enough money to buy or to drill a well. Next. In 1967 was Canada's centennial, and many communities in the country decided to celebrate by compiling a community history book. At this time, a committee was formed to prepare a community history for Chestermere. And this is a photograph of some of the ladies who were involved in preparing the book. Left to right are Joyce Laycock, Joyce McElroy, Helen Ray, Agnes Lester, and Mary Barker. There was a lot of things they did then that we would not have to do now. They had to read all the proofs for the book, and now a lot of that kind of thing is done digitally. 9th of August, 1975, saw the first wedding in the old hall of Ava Johnson and Alan Simon. Next. on February the 14th, 1979, the Chestermere Historical Society was formed and incorporated in 1974. And on the 12th of February, 1972, they published the first history book for Chestermere, Saddles, Sleighs, and Satirons, which is now out of print, but you can occasionally get a copy in an antique or bookstore. Next. Although it had been discussed for many years, the community got serious about building a new facility as the old one was getting hard to maintain. They decided to have a bang-up party to celebrate many years of use of the old hall. 250 members and former members attended the event. You can read more about this on page 230 to 235 of the book, Chestermere, A Home for All Season. And if you look at Jen's picture, you can see the book in the background. Next. In November of 1980, they turned the soil for the new community center. Next. These are photographs of the old, in with the new, out with the old. We do have fond memories of the old hall, but it was becoming tired. And you can see that they kept the old hall as long as they could until the new one was ready. Next. This is the end of an era. As the population of Chestermere by this time was becoming greater than the population of the surrounding area, the result was that the recreational needs were changing a great deal. And so the new rec hall was somewhat different. Next. I invited people to share their memories. To begin with, I'm going to give you a memory shared in the Chestermere History book, Chestermere, A Home for All Seasons. This was given by Jean Whitaker, who was my mother's best friend for many years. This is a photograph of Jean and her mother, Mrs. Whitaker is all I knew her by. She wrote, around 1930, my mother, Annie Whitaker, started a dance orchestra of which I was part, playing the saxophone and sometimes piano. We played in almost all the community halls around, Chestermere, Shepherd, Rockyview, Airdrie, Balzac, Crossvale, and many others. A couple of regulars in the orchestra were Hedley McLaughlin on banjo and Barbara Bates on the saxophone. In 1949, my mother became ill and the orchestra was disbanded. There are many stories from people about the old hall, and if anyone has memories of things that they experienced in the old hall, we'd be glad to hear from you about them. Thank you. Thank you very much. Jen, you're mute.
Oh, so thank you. If anyone has any stories to share, that would be excellent, because part of what's great about this program is having other people here to add their memories, because they might be watching this because they have some of those memories.
Jen, it's Sharon. I've got no memories, obviously, because I wasn't in Canada at the time and I wasn't born then. But oh my gosh, bring back the good old days. Seriously, bring back that hall.
Well, I can.
You can get in.
Go ahead.
You can get in touch with us through the website, and I don't just have it on the tip of my tongue here. but that will be a great way to let us know some of your memories if you have any of them. Thank you.
Well, I certainly can remember when the new hall was being built, and they were building the skating rink on the inside of the hall. And because everyone was so eager to skate on that rink, it seems to me that it was cold and they flooded, even though the ice machine, the ice making part wasn't in there, but they flooded it so that you could skate on it. So I am pretty sure we took our son Max in there to skate, and he would have been just a few, just a toddler with his skates on going in. But then the problem was then all that water melted and they had to deal with the sort of mess inside this shell of a building that wasn't completed yet. So I think that's one of my memories of that.
I know when we first came out here, Bill Porter, who was our first mayor, I remember we had like a political, I wouldn't say political forum where Bill was up presenting himself as the politician to become mayor. And then I also was a Beaver leader along with Hayden Paddock, who was involved with the construction of the using a bobcat of the new building, the flooring of that. So, but Hayden and I were Beaver leaders in that old building, and it was rough. The floor was pretty rough, yeah. But I must admit, I've been involved with the Historical Foundation, but Kay, what a great job, because there's a lot of new stuff that I didn't realize, so at Victoria Square, and so that was great, so well done. Yeah.
When we
Thank
first
you.
moved out, great, Kay. When we first moved out here, which would be 76, and into the early 80s, we attended some of the dances at that hall, and they had Hawaiian nights. And those would usually happen in February and March, because people weren't snowbirds so much. People would go to Hawaii and come back. Anyway, they always had Hawaiian nights, and we would go there, and somebody had made like a ginormous thing of pineapple meatballs, and everybody wore their leis, and then we'd all dance around on that floor. And just like you said, Kay, that floor was there from the 20s, and it was dusty. I mean, I think we were still jumping around on that floor and stirring up dust from back at the factory.
I understand that the floor was not exactly stable, and that it did sort of have rolling waves when you were dancing.
Yeah, oh, yeah, for sure.
That I didn't experience.
No, I think people would often trip on the floor, depending on how late
I understand
it was.
It wasn't stable. It moved up and down a bit as they were dancing. So.
So what do you remember do you remember ever being in the old hall, Vicki? Because I know, heavens, you were at the new rec center for so long, but.
No, I didn't move to Strathmore till 85.
Okay, so.
So yeah, it would have been before my time as well.
Right. Yeah, it was quite the place. I noticed yesterday that Chris Tarbs had signed into one of our programs, and Chris was the manager at the new hall right at the very beginning. So I didn't get a chance to talk to him yesterday, but he did come around to one of the country fairs when we were honoring some of the people who are involved at the very beginning of the time when we had the country fair, which was, just after the hall was decommissioned.
So Kay, I'm just showing the transfer of title. So the CPR owned the property first, and then the community members bought it as a kind of a group. Is that correct? And then somehow
Yes.
Rocky View
The
got it.
CPR owned it. Was part of Section 15, and the CPR owned it. The group in 1921 purchased the land, and then Mel Brown hauled out the floor, and they constructed that. But the community center that was formed in 1921 was pretty well bankrupt by 1939. And that's when John McDonald footed the bill to erase the bankruptcy proceedings. And the community had actually raised enough money to do that. Back taxes and all the rest of it. So
then it became part of the MD of Rocky View at some point, right?
yes. Yes. So the CPR was actually not on, they still owned the land around the lake, but they didn't own those 22 or 26 acres or however many it was. I think it was 22 to start with. So for more information, you can definitely read Chestermere, A Home for All Seasons, because there's quite a bit of information about it in there.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess Chris Marves is here tonight, and he just sent in the chat, I remember the old hall was much like a trampoline during a dance. And he said he was involved in taking the old hall down. But it wasn't. I think we always said it was a horsehair sprung floor. Now, I don't know what that is, but that was always what they said was the bounciness of that floor. So
I suspect it was somewhat of an old wives' tale.
well, I think you're right.
Okay. I would have known because I'm allergic to horses.
Yeah. Anyway, that was quite the place, and I'm amazed that there wasn't a basement there, because it seems to me that hall was just on the ground. Like, to imagine there was a basement, I'm sure it didn't have a foundation. It was just a dirt dug basement. Was that correct, Kay? Or was there?
Well, originally it was. When the men's club was formed, apparently it was a concrete brick wall, concrete block wall was put in. I don't know who excavated it, whether they did, but that was what it was. And it wasn't much of a basement, although they did store things like chairs and tables and whatnot down there, because they had banquets in there from time to time, but you can't have all the tables that you would need for a banquet at the same time you would have a dance. Mm-hmm. So they had to have some place to store things, mm-hmm. and it went to the basement.
Yes, I think when we acquired the materials from the men's club, from Kim Soderberg, who got it from her grandpa, Gordon, I think you're right that there was something in there about maybe the men's club fixed the basement up. Is that correct?
Oh, yes.
So they were the ones who did the sort of recondition, or the fixing up so that it could be used as a meeting place.
Yes. I suspect it wasn't a great meeting place, but it was used that way.
Mm-hmm. Seems it would be a bit damp and dark down there.
I'm sure it would, and especially if they didn't have power. So
no,
they did have a couple of fires, not minor fires. The kitchen was something else again. They actually could host a turkey supper. The ladies would cook at home and take it to the quote unquote kitchen, supervised by Mrs. Barker, and serve hundreds of people this way. So mm-hmm. it was quite a chore, because it was a very small kitchen.
Yes, it was always amazing to me, with the small population out here, how many people would come to the events at the hall. Even as a resident that only came here in the 70s, it always amazed me in terms of how you know, how big the population was, how many people would turn out for the turkey suppers.
Oh, yeah.
Good. So if there aren't any more questions or comments, I'll just check in the chat and see if anyone has put anything else in there. No. Okay. So looks like that will be sort of it for us in terms of the presentation. But want to thank Kay for this presentation and for all the research she did, poring over those minute books and all the scribbly handwriting.
That was fun. That was fun job. I have transcribed it. If anybody wants to read it, you can let the Chestermere Historical Foundation know, because it is available.
Right. And I
Not the original book.
No. Okay. But I think your notes for this talk we have already on our website, but now we will have the recording to go with it.
And I hope they go together.
Yeah, well, you might have had some extra stuff to say tonight that won't be
I might
on the
have.
recording.
I might have.
Jen and
Yes.
Kay and everybody on the Zoom meeting, I just want to say on behalf of the Seniors Week Committee and myself, thank you very much for being part of Seniors Week and doing this excellent presentation. It was really interesting. I like to say, because I haven't lived in Canada all my life and I don't know much about the history of Chestermere, this was fascinating and a really good insight into the Chestermere Hall. So thank you so much for doing this and being part of, again, Seniors Week. It's very much appreciated.
Good, thank you. And the Chestermere Historical Foundation will be part of Historic Calgary Week in July, where we will be doing 2 presentations as part of the Chinook Country History Week on the Monday of that week. I think it's the 27th. So we're very active with doing programs, and we really appreciate that the city asked us to do these 2 programs to bring more awareness to Chestermere's history. And as we say, history's being made every day. We're so busy trying to record the past. We hope we can catch up to today. Okay, thank you, Kay. And thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
For inviting us. And thanks to all the participants.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
All right.